Hello everybody, welcome to my YouTube channel, and this is episode 38 of my channel, and it's something a bit different. On Saturday I'll be presenting a paper at the 8th Wellington Congress at the University of Southampton here in England, and my paper is called Highly Meritorious, and I'm using this opportunity to rehearse my paper and also to record it for posterity and for my YouTube channel. So I hope you enjoy. Hello everybody, thank you for coming to my talk, and I'd like to thank the organisers for inviting me to give this presentation. I'm going to talk about one single day in the retreat from Burgos, the 23rd of October in 1812. The talk will feature the combats that took place in a 12-mile stretch of road centred on Venta de Pozo and ending at Rodrigo. My master of the chart features two of the key participants, George Anson of the British Light Dragoons and Battelle, who commanded one of the Army of North's cavalry brigades. So this is what I'm going to cover in the talk. I'll give you a bit of background as to where we are and what we're doing, why we should be interested in this particular day, the orders of battle that of the two sides, and then the four individual combats that made up the fighting on this day. And then I'll wrap up with some conclusion remarks. So first of all, let's have some background of the Peninsular War in 1812. In July of 1812, Wellington fought arguably his masterpiece, the Battle of Salamanca, where he defeated Marmont's army of Portugal. And he went on from there to liberate Madrid and decided to strike north and capture the French-held castle of Burgos. Unfortunately for him, the siege of Burgos was a failure. And by the third week of October, the French had started to threaten more offensive action, and Wellington was particularly concerned about Hill facing superior numbers in Madrid. So he decided to call the end of the siege of Burgos and retreat back to safety. So we're going to focus on a small part of that retreat as Wellington's army struggled along the main road from Burgos towards Valladolid. The 23rd of October was the second day of the retreat. There were two infantry columns making up the Allied armies, and they reached Torquemada after a march of 27 miles. In order to cover their retreat, the rearguard fought four separate combats, engagements along the main road of the southern column. So why should we be interested in this day? For me, I became interested when I was writing my book Wellington at Bay, which was based on the Battle of Meritorious 2 days after the events we're speaking about today. In preparing the research for that book, I fell into a particular rabbit hole that was the 23rd of October, and I was interested. It caught my interest because of the heavy cavalry element involved in the engagements, whereas the Meritorious was largely an infantry battle. But why might you be interested? Well, for me it became a rabbit hole largely because of the lack of clarity in existing accounts, which is there in the secondary accounts but also in some of the primary accounts. And I've chosen an example to illustrate this today. This is Caffarelli's report to the Minister of War in Paris. Caffarelli ran the Army of the North, who contributed some cavalry to help Souham's army of Portugal in their pursuit of the British. And I'm going to pick out various bits in this report. First thing to say is, of course, none of these primary documents are written with historians in mind, so you have to expect some difficulty in interpreting them in our terms. In Caffarelli's report, obviously he's going to big up the role played by the cavalry of his own army in support of the army of Portugal. And here he talks about his cavalry, the gendarmerie and the 15th Chasseurs and Berg Lancers, meeting the British rearguard, he says near Villadrigo. Well, Venta de Pozo is near Villadrigo, but this is what he's talking about, and this action took place in the afternoon of the 23rd. So I now want to focus on the middle of his report. In this, he doesn't really talk about his own cavalry, but he does mention the division of dragoons. So the division of dragoons he talks about are from the army of Portugal, and he accuses them of disappearing and not supporting the other French cavalry when they faced off against the British infantry and cavalry. Here he's actually talking about the action at Villadrigo in the evening, which is the part that the division of dragoons actually took part in. And I now want to talk about the last piece of this extract of his report. Here he's talking about the 1st Hussars and the 31st Chasseurs, which were part of his army. And he talks about the charge they made on the 16th Light Dragoons. Well, this action actually took place, I believe, at Villanueva de las Carretas around midday. And but it's his own guys, so he's keen to point out their achievements. So when we talk about Caffarelli's report, one way of summarising it is all the right words, but not necessarily in the right order. If you look further at the accounts, they're also muddled and somewhat telescoped. You don't get the impression, even in Oman, of how far apart some of these actions were and in what order they took place. The best example I can give you of that is this map, which readily pops up when you do a Google search of Venta del Pozo or Villadrigo. Now it looks very nice, but when you look at the detail of the map, it does show the guest house Venta del Pozo, but it shows it 2,000 metres southeast of Villadrigo, whereas it actually was 3 miles or nearly 5,000 metres northeast of Villadrigo. But when you look at the accounts, it's easy to believe that this might be the case. Secondly, it includes the fighting that took place at Villanueva de las Carretas, approximately 9 miles away to the northeast. So now I want a quick look at the orders of battle of the units fighting that day. So we'll start with the British and Allied order of battle. So Wellington's rearguard was commanded by Stapleton Cochrane, and it comprised Bock's KGL Brigade of Dragoons, Anson's Brigade of Light Dragoons, and Bull's troop of the Royal Horse Artillery. Amon has down another troop there, but he mistook the role of downman in the organisation. Downman was the commander of the Royal Horse Artillery in Wellington's army, so he was basically helping Ramsay, who was actually in command of Bull's troop on the day. And then finally we have Halkett's brigade of KGL Light Infantry, 2 battalions. in all, there's approximately 2,500 men making up the British rearguard. Now, these men were supported by Sanchez's Spanish cavalry brigade, and also by Maucune's guerrilla band, which was actually being commanded by Puente on this day, and together Armand gives them about 1,000 sabres. Thirdly, there was Ponsonby's heavy cavalry brigade, which Armand says was well out in the lead of the retreat. And however, there's a bit of debate as to exactly what that looked like for Ponsonby and his men. Was he leading the northern column, the southern column, or was his brigade divided between the two and leading both? So now let's go on and look at the French order of battle. One thing that interested me about the French order of battle is that Soult entrusted the advance guard, arguably a very important post in the circumstances, to Maucune, who obviously, as most of you will know, received a lot of the blame for the defeat at Salamanca just a few months before. So it's interesting that Soult chose him to be his commander, his advance guard commander. If you want to know more about Maucune at Salamanca, my chapter in Glory is Fleeting is worth a read, because I go into some detail in what happened to Maucune at Salamanca. So Maucune's advance guard comprised Curto's light cavalry division, which was made up of Shay's brigade of chasseurs à cheval, Curto's own brigade of light cavalry led by Desfosses, plus Boyer's dragoon division, made up of 2 brigades of 4 regiments of dragoons. These were all from the Army of Portugal. The Army of Portugal was supported by 2 brigades of cavalry of the Army du Nord, Merlin's brigade of light cavalry, and Bataille's brigade of gendarmes, lancers and chasseurs à cheval. So altogether that came to around 5,500 men. Also with the advance guard were Maucune's own 5th Infantry Division of the Army of Portugal. It is clear they didn't do very much on the day. They trudged along after the cavalry. There is no record of any casualties in Martinienne, for instance. So in summary, the French had 5,500 men involved, all cavalry, and the British had a force of 2,500 men, supported by 1,000 Spanish. So the French significantly outnumbered the Allied army. So let's move on to the first hour of the retreat just to set the context. So this is on the 22nd of October. Wellington formed his infantry into 2 columns, which you can see here, a southern column and a northern column. But there was also a flank guard, which was made up of Bock and Sanchez on the left bank of the Rio Alonzon, and also light of the 4th Dragoons suggests that at least part of Ponsonby's brigade was with this flank guard, and you can see them having got to as far as Cayuela by around midday on the 22nd. So at daybreak at 6:30 on the 23rd, the distribution of the troops looked something like this. The French had reached the picket line of the Allied armies, and the dispositions of the French are as shown. The only one that's conjectural is Desfosses. His brigade hardly took part in any fighting that we can see, no casualties, etc. So the assumption I've made is that they must have been shadowing Sanchez on the other bank of the Rio Alonso. So now we come to the first of our 4 combats, the combat at Salada del Camino. This will have taken place somewhere between 8 and 11 in the morning. Wellington, his dispatch tells us that this combat held up the French for as much as 3 hours. So Jay's brigade of chasseurs à cheval led the attack for the French and encountered the British rearguard just shy of the village. So this is what William Smith of the 11th Light Dragoons recorded in his journal. The enemy came up with us at daybreak, cannonading for some time. They then charged our skirmishers and pressed us so hard that one squadron of the 16th Light Dragoons and our regiment were obliged to charge in front of the village, and with some confusion, and retired behind the Hormaza, on which were placed the whole kit's infantry. And when we again got in order and retired, a squadron occasionally charging. We now move on a bit further down the road to the second combat, which I believe was at Villanueva de las Carretas. Given the distances involved and the average marching speeds of the units involved, this must have taken place around midday. This is the likely battlefield, which shows Merlin's brigade emerging from their sortie through the hills, emerging back on the main road around Villaldimiro in pursuit of Maucune's guerrillas. In Wellington's words, the rearguard continued to fall back in the best order till the guerrillas on the left, having been driven in, they rode towards the flank of the rearguard of Major Anson's brigade, and 4 or 5 squadrons of the enemy mixed with them. They were mistaken for Spaniards, and they fell upon the flank and rear of our troops. We sustained some loss. Lieutenant Colonel Pelly of the 16th Dragoons, having had his horse shot, was taken prisoner. So we now move on to the better known combats of this day, the combat of Venta de Pozo. So again, this a bit later in the afternoon. This happened between about 3 and 4 p.m. So Batel's brigade had by this time taken the lead in the French pursuit, and they came up across Anson's brigade at around this guest house on the Arroyo de Principal. And Anson's brigade retired across the bridge to join Bock on the far side, and was followed by the French. Some years ago, when I was doing this research originally, Professor Esdale kindly gave me his photographs of the battlefield, and you can see, were it not for the Arroyo de Principal, it's a pretty good cavalry country. As most of you know, there was a bit of a mix-up on the British side, with the artillery being masked by the retiring dragoons of Anson's brigade. And this is Colonel Favereau's description in his report of what then ensued. There was a scrum of 7 to 8 minutes, during which we fought with extraordinary fierceness on both sides. Finally, the first enemy line was thrown back on the second, the latter, which presented a double front, advanced in its terms. Its squadrons on the right were instantly charged, overthrown, and enveloped by the squadrons of the gendarmerie, which formed our left and arrived on the line. Finally, the enemy in disorder was thrown back on Villadrigo. During the fighting, Batteri, the brigade commander, was wounded 12 times. So I don't know if that means he was very brave or a poor swordsman, but nonetheless he was in a bad way. So bad that Favereau wrote the report, the brigade report, to to his superiors, rather, because Battelle wasn't able to. So this has led to some of the accounts erroneously believing that Faverolles himself was in command on the day. And then lastly we come to the well-known combat at Villadrigo. So this will have taken place somewhere between 4 and 5:30. This is October, so it was getting dark about 5:30, between 5:30 and 6 o'clock. So fighting would have finished pretty much whatever happened. So here's the terrain around Villadrigo. The key point here is that Boyer's brigade, having made a circuitous attempt to outflank the British rearguard, this finally emerged from the hills from Vismalo just as the British rearguard reached Villadrigo. There's some indication, although it's not very strong, it was Shay's brigade again that was leading the main body of the French rearguard as they tracked after the British rearguard. So the action at Villadrigo is probably best described by Captain Hodenberg, who was ADC to Bock and a member of the 1st KGL Dragoons. A second line of French cavalry composed entirely of heavy dragoons and still more formidable than the first was brought up against us. We made several attempts to reform and charge, but being reduced to a mere nothing, half our men were put hors de combat, we were unable to re-establish ourselves until the enemy's vigorous advance was checked by the destructive fire of our light infantry battalions, who, steadily retiring in square, mocked any attempt of the French cavalry to break them. To them we are certainly indebted for not being entirely cut to pieces. And I think the French made 3 charges on Halkett's squares. So darkness brought the fighting to a close, and it's reasonable to say that both sides were reasonably happy. De la Martiniere, who was the chief of staff of Souham's army, wrote that the army had made 8 leagues of country, its vanguard manoeuvring and the cavalry still fighting. It spent the night at Villadrigo. While Wellington said that the exertions of conduct of Cotton and of the officers and staff attached to him throughout this day were highly meritorious, and although the charge made by the cavalry was not successful, I had the satisfaction of observing great steadiness in their movements. Major Ball's troop of horse artillery under Dowman and Ramsey distinguished themselves. So I want to wrap the talk up with some concluding remarks. So it's worth saying a thing or two about casualties, especially given Hodenberg's comment about half of the KGL Dragoons being hors de combat. So these are the British casualties as reported in the Gazette, and you can see indeed the Box Dragoon Brigade definitely had the worst of the day, suffering 20% casualties. However, overall there were only about 250 casualties for the British. So the French casualties are not handily listed in the Gazette, but obviously we know which officers were casualties by the figures given in Martinienne. There were relatively few records specific to this day for the other ranks who were casualties. So I've fallen back on Armand's proportional technique of ratioing the officers up to the rest of the unit. If you do that, you estimate total French casualties is around 600. So in all, the French British casualties are about the same. They're about 10% of those engaged. One of the things that's notable about the day is that the French only used 1 or 2 of their brigades at a time and never really were able to or chose to deploy their huge numerical superiority. On the other hand, the other way of looking at it is obviously it meant that the British dragoons had to fight one after another of the French brigades as they retired down the road. So the numerical superiority was evidenced in a different way, rather than just getting everything on the table, as it were. So then there are a few questions I really can't answer. I've not found anything about the goings-on of Sanchez's brigade and whether de Pozo was following him, how hard they were being pursued, or whether it was an orderly retirement. Similarly, the northern column, the 5th Infantry Division and the Galicians, well, there's very, very little known about what happened to them during that day, and there doesn't appear to have been French pursuit of them, for instance. And also, Ponsonby's brigade, what was his role during their role during the day? Again, evidence is pretty thin on the ground, even regarding where they were, let alone what they were actually doing. So I just want to finish with my sources. This is the first of 3 slides of these, and fairly normal collection. The second slide emphasizes the fact that I've taken work from both the French, the Spanish, and of course the British. And finally, the third slide of sources, which ends fittingly on my own Wellington and Bay. So that's what I wanted to say. So thank you all for listening. If you're interested in seeing this presentation again, or you want to study the sources or whatever in more detail, it'll be available tonight on my YouTube channel at Gary Wall's Wargamer Author. It's a rehearsal I did earlier on in the week. On the channel you can also find my war games of Venta de Pozo, which are interesting exploration of what could and couldn't have happened on that day. Thank you.